Hi everyone, this is Ren here, an ever scruffier version of myself, talking to you in this new video to pursue the explanation of my philosophical framework, Open Monism, as the title indicates. So as I announced in the previous video towards the end, as the previous video seems to have gone a bit, overboard in terms of length, I will try to keep the length of this new video, part 2, under 15 minutes. We'll see if I manage, but hopefully I will succeed, knowing that it's always an option to just continuing having different parts. I'm thinking that maybe if I'm going to start talking about Open Monism in detail across several videos, why not just have exactly just as many as I as I want to. I mean, nothing limits me. I might just create a little folder within my YouTube channel dedicated to the series of Open Monism lectures or something. Sounds incredibly pompous. Sorry about that, but yeah. I'm the lecturer and I will tell you all about Open Monism, this the revolution in philosophy since Kant. I'm joking, by the way, just so you know. So, just to, as I like to do, just like before I fully plunge into my topic, to give you a tiny bit of context, this metaphysical worldview, whose kind of bare structure I began to sketch in my first video, is still ongoing. I have not finished the system. So please provide feedback, critique, or anything else to make me improve if you have ideas. I mean, I have already benefited from a lot of insights, from a number of people that I cannot thank enough, and I hope they continue providing feedback. But it's still a work in progress, so this could very much be an exchange about the open framework, as well as an opportunity for you guys to hear me talk about it. I don't want it to be like a top-down thing. Let's make it as horizontal as possible, which, by the way, is compatible with my framework. I like to say that, oh yeah, by the way, this is compatible with Open Monism. Therefore, it seems to be compatible with everything, so should be true. So, at the end of the last video, I had begun to talk a little bit more in detail about how in Open Monism the underlying thing which inheres in everything that is, okay, was not necessarily to be understood in the typical way that has tended to be understood in the monist tradition, and I would say in general in any metaphysical tradition. So this is actually quite important because it actually ties in with a little topic that I tackled in depth, not in my video about Open Monism Part 1, but about my philosophical background. So I know that not necessarily everyone has watched that video, but if you do, just pay attention to the first half in particular, where I talk about how Nietzsche produced a very, very important work in the history of philosophy, because he called into question the very notion of essence, the idea that like anything that can be conceptualized, conceived, anything that is, can be reduced to its essence, its essential parts that make it what it is. What Nietzsche essentially, in essence, again, I never plan to pun, but sometimes it happens. In Nietzsche, the attempt that is made is to replace the concept of essence with the concept of will and of will to power. So the idea of an ever-expanding presence that gives itself continually to the world, rather than just being circumscribed by a certain set of criteria. And I know it's a very abstract concept, but I think that if you do not understand this concept, you might have a bit of trouble with Open Monism, because you might be thinking, what the hell is this openness thing that is supposed to inhere in everything? It sounds vague, it sounds like we could say anything, you know, inheres in things. Why openness? Why not closure, for example? Why not, I don't know, transcendence? Why not horizontality? Any concept, you know. Why not the concept of the clown or the bed or the water in here and everything? I mean, this needs to be fleshed out a little bit, I understand. So my purpose will be to try to convince you, or not to convince you, actually, no, it's not true. I do not mean to convince you, but to give you the key to understanding, and then being able to say, okay, I understand what he means and I reject it, or I'm willing to give it a chance regarding a monism of openness. So openness in hearing and everything. So as you can already guess, in a sense, openness is a replacement for essence. Now, when it comes to not the nature of an individual thing whose essence traditionally has been taken to be the defining set of properties that make the thing, without which the thing would not be what it is. Besides that, you have a very closely connected concept of substance. And the substance is usually not to be understood as an essence. A substance is to be understood as, if you like, you have a thing, the properties that are essential to it are the essence. But the entirety of what the thing is, like what makes the thing, is supposed to sort of be a substance. That is independence. A substance is supposed to be independence, timeless, etc. And so, for instance, you could say, well, human beings and animals, for example, their essence is very different, and so we might come up with certain properties to define the essence of a human being, the essence of a lion, and these would be different essences. We just have to get at the core properties of what define the essence of these beings. Whereas the substance would be at a lower level, whether they are beings that are of mind and matter. And so the properties of the essence would also be a properties of mind and matter, but they would be at a sort of less basic level than the substance, even though in terms of the being of anything, the essence has been traditionally taken to be basic in the sense that it gives the parameters of being. But being where it is, not being where it emerges from. So the substance, well, I've talked about it in my previous video, the substance, as you can see, is closely connected to the concept of essence, but usually an essence defines a class of being. With practice, this is what it does. It pretends to sort of separate classes of being or classes of entities. You sort of isolate the essence of a particular entity, and you'll notice that certain families of entities have just similar essences, and so you connect the essences together and organize them into classes, which you can then look at and consider from a logical point of view, within set theory or within lots of other approaches to logic. Whereas the substance is not what constitutes, what is the core of any number of different classes. The substance is what all the different classes sort of belong to in terms of what they are made of. So you could say, for example, I'm not sure the analogy is perfect, but it would be kind of like the difference between my face and the expression on my face. You could say, well, the expression on my face is my essence, while my face is my substance. Like, this is just an analogy to be understood not as a parallel, of essence and substance, in the sense that the expression is like the essence and the face is like the substance. Is the analogy here is in the connection between the two. This is my face and this is my expression. You see how they are connected and yet different. My face, is in a sense more universal than my expression. Okay. So then what I want to say here is that often this concept of substance is taken to be what underlies reality, the substantial substrate, basically, of things. It's often, of course, at a very abstract level, but it tends to be quite prevalent, if not just basically the way that people understand different metaphysical systems. It's not true that substance is always explicitly the underlying thing, but when it is not explicitly so, it tends to be implicitly so. So sometimes the underlying thing is to be understood in terms of like properties, and substance seems to be what, in my opinion, underlies these systems. Now, substance and essence have this thing in common that, again, like, they're supposed to be understood in terms of being defined via a certain closure. So you can tell, okay, this is what a substance is, and now I can tell sort of what it is. This is what an essence is, and I can tell what it is, so that I can sort of make a hierarchy between different classes of being with different essences, with the underlying substance that encompasses everything. So if you have a monist system, what happens is that you get like an underlying substance. For example, you could get, in the case of, let's say like in Spinoza, for example, since I spoke about Spinoza last time, you can say, well, the underlying substance is nature or God, same thing. But then you'd have like essences that are different beings, different things in the world. But there is a clear definition, a clear circumscribing of what substance is and what essence is, and this seems to make sense to us. Where openness is different, and where it sort of is influenced by the theories of Nietzsche, is that openness says it resists the concept of essence. It refuses to be closed, if you like. An openness is by definition something that is in such a way that it is necessarily connected with other things and cannot be reduced to single essentialization or substantialization. And again, we are at a very, very abstract level here, but this is very important to understanding Open Monism and its attempt to propose a monistic framework that actually will avoid stasis by having at its very core, at its very heart, a concept not just of a different substance than usually people would come up with. So instead of saying, oh, I have a new substance in mind, or I have a new kind of essence, or a new way to define what essence is, or here the idea behind Open Monism goes at a deeper level. So it's more about, I have another way to conceive of this supposed underlying thing. Why do we always have to think in terms of like this picture of an underlying substance that just undergirds everything? Is that not what's trapping us into static thinking? Why don't we try to like rethink what inheres in all that is as something different, and for example as openness? And in order to sort of give a bit more flesh to this concept of openness so that people would understand what I mean by it, I came up with the concept of ground. Why ground? Because the ground presents several advantages. It's in a certain sense, it is grounded, so it always comes from somewhere. There's this idea of belonging to a place. Anything that is actually belongs to a place. So it should be inscribed in its metaphysical nature that there is this belongingness. You never just are. You always are somewhere. Being, like an abstract, it could be a category, but it's very hard to understand what it would mean. So being tends to be being. It's being somewhere. And it's being many other things besides. Being is not like this intransitive thing. So you could sort of summarize it as being grounded. At the same time, you're not just somewhere, you're connected to other things. And you could argue that what has tended to be understood metaphysically as like transcendental or as being everywhere is still grounded somewhere, except that it's open towards everything, but always from a stance. Being from a stance. Being has a perspective. Being has a point of view. And this is a fundamental difference. Essence just says, okay, this is a circle, and this is how we can define being in abstract. What I'm saying is, like, there's no such thing as like a set of properties that defines an essence, defines a substance. What there is like an opening from a ground. The ground grounds, while the opening from the ground belongs to the ground, and at the same time is open to the rest of what, you know, is in the universe throughout the whole of reality. So it's really a matter of imagining that, like, if you had a map with different points, right? Instead of there being like lots of essences made of the same substance, same color blue or something, what you get here is like lots of different openings that are sort of open to one another in every sense, and there is nothing else. There is no like color blue for the substance. The opening, I mean, the openness, the open groundedness, you know, that I mentioned in my previous video. Open groundedness is the nature of being an open ground. So you're in a ground, but you notice that like a ground is never just a ground. It's always sort of looking towards something. And this combining of grounds, which gives a perspective and a set of things that in the end will kind of correspond to the essence. But at the same time, it's not a closed essence. It's an open essence, because by virtue of being grounded and having these core properties that fix the thing, are also what opens it to the rest of the other things, which are in turn grounded and connected. And so this is a very abstract model. This is a very abstract concept, but it is, I believe, fundamentally believe, very different from the traditional conception of essence and of substance. And in fact, as Bertrand Russell himself called for in his classic book, The History of Western Philosophy, he said, you know, that ideally one should do away with the concept of substance, and it's not clear what the difference between essence and substance really is, that there are lots of confusion and obscurity about these two concepts. Well, I didn't necessarily plan to follow Russell's call or attempt to follow it, but in essence, I am sort of getting rid of the concept of essence and the concept of substance, because in the concept of ground, of open groundedness, everything is open groundedness. This like opening from a ground that is both openness and ground, closure and opening out of closure. I'm sort of combining both at the same time, and at the same time going beyond this idea that what is has to be a closed thing. It's actually an open thing, although of course many beings will be seen to be open in many different ways. Okay, I'll give you a break now. It's been a bit shorter than 15 minutes. It will be 18 minutes, but I think that I've covered enough ground. So think about it and get back to me. See you guys.